Good morning, sunshines. Hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to talk about Oedipus Rex. I hope you've had a chance to look it over. Again, if you've been assigned Oedipus Rex as your group or as your play to analyze, just send me your analysis and I will disseminate it to the rest of the class. If you weren't assigned it, you'll hopefully still been able to read it. We're going to talk a little bit about it today. One of the frustrating parts about this type of presentation is that usually in class we're able to have a back and forth with the discussions about to follow, but I'm going to forge ahead and you can certainly have your opinions, and if you disagree with me, please feel free to send me a little email and let me know, and we'll sort of start a little chat based on some of this information. First of all, the play is obviously very serious. It's got a very serious message. One of the questions I might ask on an essay question is, what do you think the playwright's intent was? Which we'll talk a little bit about some possibilities of what you think, what Sophocles may have written the play for. First of all, this is all in celebration of the god Dionysus, and so it is part of a festival. But by the time that Sophocles is writing his plays, don't necessarily have a direct connection anymore to the actual celebration. They're just a part of a competition now where various city-states are competing for the prize at the end of the week. Again, we're going to talk more about that after we talk about the discussion of the play. First of all, before we get into Oedipus specifically, let's just talk about some things that can be confusing. First of all, there are several Greek myths, just like there are several American myths. The two classic Greek myths are Oedipus and Odysseus. Unfortunately, both of them start with OD. Odysseus is the story of the Odyssey, which Homer relates to us and is in book form, but tells the story of Odysseus and his army trying to come back to Greece after the Trojan War. The two great books by Homer, the Iliad tells the story of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus and his men. Odysseus was one of the generals at the Trojan battle, and he and his group are trying to get back to Greece, and they run into Cyclopses, and they run into mermaids. It takes them 20 years to get back home, and so that is the Odyssey. Oedipus is the story of the king of Thebes eventually. Now, just like in America, where we have Star Wars and Star Trek, Star Wars happened long ago and far away, and it has people like Yoda, and it has people like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Star Trek happens in America's future, around 2400 AD, so about 300 years or so is when Star Trek is set, and it has people like the Klingons and Dr. Spock, or excuse me, Mr. Spock. You're supposed to live long and prosper. I don't know if you can do this, but it's one of those things you do. Anyway, they both start with star, and they can be confusing to people who are not knowledgeable about the different tales. But Odysseus and Oedipus are two separate tales, just like Star Wars and Star Trek are two separate tales. Now, again, we talked about the other day, one of the things you can fault Oedipus Rex for is not fully containing the myth of Oedipus. And so for those of us who didn't know necessarily the myth of Oedipus, because you start right in the middle of it, you sort of, it leaves you wanting to know how we got here. And so just to go back and just fill in the gaps, Oedipus was born to the king of Thebes, and when he went to an oracle to discover what the fate of his son's life was, the oracle told the king of Thebes, Oedipus' father, that his son was going to grow up and kill him, Laius, and marry his wife Jocasta, so Oedipus' mother. And so to avoid this fate, Laius gave the child to a shepherd and told him he bound his feet. Supposedly they pierced his ankles and tied them together, which caused his feet to swell. And in Greek, Oedipus literally means swollen foot. Anyway, they gave him to this shepherd who was supposed to go out, and much like in Snow White, he was supposed to cut his heart out, kill the baby. And when he got there, the shepherd couldn't do it And so he put the child in a, depending on which version of the story you hear, put the child in a basket and it floated down the river, again, sort of like the story of Moses. And it was found by this handmaid to the queen of Corinth. And the queen of Corinth was barren, or they for some reason couldn't have children. And so the handmaiden took this baby she found in this basket on the river to the queen of Corinth, and she and her husband adopted the baby as their own. And so Oedipus is raised as the child of the king and queen of Corinth. And when he becomes of age, 18, he goes to the oracle and wants the oracle to tell him his future. And the oracle says, you're going to kill your father and marry your mother. And not wanting to kill his father and marry his mother, he ran away from Corinth. And on the way back to Thebes, at what was called the meeting of the five roads, he apparently runs into a party, including his real father, Laius. There is some sort of altercation, road rage, and at some point everybody is killed in this but a man that's later called the messenger. And he relates the story of how Oedipus had killed everyone in the party, including the king Laius. So Oedipus then continues on to Thebes, where the city is being wrecked by a sphinx, held and captured by the sphinx, and the sphinx has a riddle, the riddle of the sphinx. The riddle of the sphinx goes something to the effect of what has 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night. And of course, Oedipus is able to solve the riddle. I'm going to give you a second to think about it, to know if you have the solution to the riddle. But the solution to the riddle is man. A man, when he's born, a child, crawls on all 4s. When he grows up in his youth and in maturity, he has 2 legs. And then when he gets old and ancient like me, suddenly you have to walk around with a cane, the 3rd leg. And so he's able to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. And the Sphinx acquiesces, is killed by, commits suicide in one version, is slain by Oedipus in another version. Again, there's slightly different versions of the story over time. But Oedipus is able to defeat the Sphinx, and as his reward is given the queen. And again, here's where, as you're reading these plays, you need to develop a mental picture of these characters. Jocasta, his mother, has got to be old enough to be his mother. Now let's give Oedipus, just for a round figure, 20 years old. Women can bear children at 15, but let's give her 18, 20 years before she has Oedipus. So she's at least 38-ish, 40-ish. I don't know if you know who Betty White is, but I'm going to say it's not Betty White, so that when he's awarded Jocasta as his prize, he doesn't go in fear. He's very excited. I'm not real sure. I haven't done any research on her, recently, like last night. But I think Angelina Jolie is 45 now. So I would say that would be in my mental image of an older lady, not that she's old, don't get me in trouble, but an older 45-ish young lady who could be old enough to be his mother, and also someone he would want to marry. The 2 of them could join and have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. And it is at this point in the myth of Oedipus where Oedipus Rex begins. There's a plague that has descended upon the city again. Thebes is under a plague. And the citizens, led by the priest, come to Oedipus and beg for his help in figuring out why the city is under this new plague. He sends Creon to the oracle. The oracle tells Creon that they need to find the killer of Laius, and unbeknownst to Oedipus, he is the person they are seeking. And there are a variety of scenes. There's a scene where he goes to Tiresias, who is a blind prophet, and Tiresias says, be careful who you're looking for, because you may not like who you find. He considers the options and is worried about Creon's faithfulness. And the chorus comes to him and says, no, Creon and Tiresias have always been pretty good guys. Eventually, Jocasta figures it out first, that Oedipus might be her son, and so she goes and hangs herself. And eventually Oedipus discovers that he is indeed the killer of Laius, the person they're looking for, and there's a scene where he gouges his eyes out in response to this, and he is left at the end of the play wandering, and eventually in the Oedipus Colonus, that's hard to say, is the death is a different play. It's another play, but there's a whole other play called Oedipus Rex, where you have the death of Oedipus. But at the end of this play, Oedipus Rex, he has just poked his eyes out and is left wandering the earth in that condition. So that's the story of Oedipus, the myth of Oedipus. And again, it would have been well known to Greek audiences. And this just sort of fills in the gaps as to who says what, who does what exactly. But it would have already been something that they knew the general sense of, what, as I just gave you there. First thing I want to discuss is fate. I know it's something that, well, let's talk about this. Is there a difference between fate and destiny? I've had it told to me, well, first of all, and again, I hate to ruin your day like this, but we all have a common fate. All of us, just like James Earl Jones, all of us have been born, which is why it's not important that James Earl Jones' birthday goes on his paper, nor your favorite actor, because he was born just like you were born. And all of us are going to eventually die. All is left for us to figure out is where and when, and how maybe. Again, that's a rather sarcastic way of looking at life, but it is also true that all of us have the same fate, all of us have the same destiny. No matter how good we live, there have been two people who have been ascended into heaven. I'll let you do your Bible research and figure out who those two people were. And one of them, it may take a little bit longer, but Elijah, I'll give you Elijah. How about that? You can figure out the other one. Thank you, you already know. Anyway, the destiny, I have been told, is something that we, well, first of all, there's the idea of free will. Most of us believe, I think, that God has a plan for us. Yes? Now, as a parent, and I don't know how many of you are parents, but as a parent, I have an overall attitude about the life of my children. I would like them to be happy. I think because I'm a happily married man, I think marriage is a part of being a happy person. I would love to see them both get married. My daughter's getting married in October, all things considered. But I would like to see them have children. But again, that's my hope for them, my dream for them. I think God has a plan like that for you in my beliefs. But again, I think you have the will, the free will, to decide whether you would like to accept God's plan for you or not. One of the things my grandfather used to say is, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him what your plans are. God has different ideas about how things work. I have been told, just as a nice difference between fate and destiny, because again, I think they're very similar. But I think fate is what the world deals to you. Some of us are born like James Earl Jones with imperfections, a stutter, a limb that may be, not as mature as the rest of us. Forrest Gump, for instance, is a little slow as a person, but that doesn't mean he still isn't a very intelligent man in his way. There's book smart, and then there's being able to figure out the meaning of life and the meaning of love and all that sort of stuff. And so in that way, I think Forrest Gump has a bit of something to say to humanity. But then destiny is the way we handle the cards. So think of it as a poker game. You're dealt a set of cards. That's destiny. That's fate, excuse me. That's the cards you have been dealt. And then destiny is the way you play those cards. For those of you who are into poker, you can take a hand that doesn't look like a winning hand, and depending upon how you play it, you can create a very winning hand. Again, that's for the poker players out there, and you may not all play poker, but just as a notion of the difference between the two, I think that's a very nice little notion to have. One of the things about this play, as for those of you who haven't read the plays but read Spark Notes instead, or some other analysis by some other people, A lot of other people are going to talk about how Oedipus has a flaw. Again, I'm going to tell you that the rules about protagonists and flaws were written 150 years after Sophocles wrote the play. And so Sophocles was unaware that a tragic hero had to have a flaw to begin with. But a lot of people are going to say that Oedipus's flaw is that he is prideful. Now I'm going to say, the way I read the play, Oedipus certainly is sure of himself, but I don't know that I read it as prideful. It seems to me that at every point Oedipus makes the same choices that I would have made. I've been in that situation where I don't want to kill my father and marry my mother, and so I would have tried to take myself out of that situation just as he did. I would have, if the oracle said I needed to find the killer of Laius, I would have looked for the killer of Laius as well. I don't know that I would have killed the man on the highway. If I was told that I was destined to kill my father, well, one way not to kill your father is not to kill anybody. If you just don't kill anybody, then guess what? You haven't killed your father. But if you get into road rage and hit a man on the head with a rock and kill him, that could have been your dad. Who knows? Anyway, so again, not to make too light of Oedipus Rex, but it does certainly discuss the idea of fate in the universe, the idea of what our destiny is and how we handle it, how we deal with it, how we can't hide from it. Whatever our destiny is, some of us are destined, you hope you're destined to graduate. Some of us may start questioning that a little bit here, but that's the reason you're in school, is to eventually get a diploma, to get a better job, I think. That's my assumption if you're taking classes and listening to this stupid lecture. But again, that's the things that, at least, I don't know if he's trying to teach you so much as have you consider Sophocles in writing this. One of the things about the play is there's a great deal of irony in the play. Now, just for fun, because that's the way I am. Some of you may have heard the song by Alanis Morissette called "Ironic." If you haven't heard it, here's a little snippet of "Ironic," just so you can be on the same page as those of us who've heard it.
An old man turned 98. He won the lottery and died the next day. It's a black fly in your Chardonnay. It's a death row pardon, 2 minutes too late. And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's like rain on your wedding day. It's a free ride and you've already paid. It's the good advice that you just didn't take. And who would have thought it figures? Mr. Play It Safe was afraid to fly. He packed his suitcase and kissed his kids goodbye.
It's a nice little popular upbeat little song, but the ironic thing about the song "Ironic" is that nothing in the song "Ironic" is ironic. Irony has a twist to it. It isn't just bad luck. Rain on your wedding day isn't ironic. It's not good luck, it's not good fortune, but it's not ironic. Winning the lottery dying the day after you won the lottery isn't ironic, it's bad luck. Now, if the person had caught the coronavirus from the lottery ticket that they bought at the store and it wound up killing them, and they won the lottery because of the same ticket, that would be ironic. So ironic is not just something that's bad luck, it's something that has a twist to it. There's a little, if this had happened, then that wouldn't have happened kind of thing to it. In Oedipus, there are a couple of ironies. One is, of course, that the most obvious one is that he's looking for the killer of Laius, and he himself is the killer of Laius. So that on itself is ironic. There's another irony, for instance, involving sight. There's a blind seer, Tiresias, who, even though he is physically blind, can see the truth, whereas Oedipus, who is physically can see, is blinded to the truth. And so that would be another example of irony in the play. Again, irony is a tool that a playwright uses to expose different aspects of the play, to make it more rich, to make it more real, to make it have a deeper meaning, that sort of stuff. And again, Sophocles, I think, does a great job at doing that. Again, there are several symbols in the play, sight being a symbol, power being a symbol. There's a lot of symbolism in the play. Again, we talked about images in the play last time, but we also talked about symbols. So again, symbols and images are tools that the playwright has at their disposal in order to augment and flesh out a play. Hopefully, that will help explain a lot about Oedipus that you may have misunderstood or had problems with. The other thing is the chorus. We're going to talk about the chorus here in a little bit. But the choral odes, for the most part, the choral odes they were sung. Again, there's a video that I'm going to link you to that shows the entire play performed by the National Theatre in England in the 50s. And they have the choruses singing and moving somewhat. I would suggest they danced a little bit more, and the songs are very drone on and on. They're more Gregorian chants than I would imagine they would have been, but again, that's not my version of the play. But at least it's a version for you to watch. I am going to show you a little video from a different production in the 60s, the scene where Oedipus, at the end of the play, asks to be thrown out of Thebes.
I have not come to mock you, Oedipus, nor to reproach you for the wrongs you have done. If you have no respect for the feelings of these people, at least show reverence for the sunlight which nourishes all men. Get him into the palace. Only his family should see this family shame. This public spectacle is indecent.
In God's name, since you have exceeded my hopes and come in so generous a spirit to one so low, do something for me. I ask it in your own interest, not mine.
What is it that you are anxious to have me do?
Banish me from this country to a place where no man can see or speak to me.
You can be sure I would have already done so. But first I wanted to ask the god Apollo what should be done.
His command was clear, every word of it. Death for the unholy man, the killer of his father.
That is what the oracle said. But in our situation, it is better to inquire what should be done.
Will you consult Apollo about anyone as miserable as I am?
Yes. And this time, I take it, you will believe what the god says.
Yes. I command you. I beg you. The woman in the palace, see to her burial. She is your sister. You are the man to do this. As for me, do not condemn this city of my fathers to shelter me within its walls. Let me live on Mount Katiron, forever linked with my name, the mountain which my mother and father chose as my burial place. Let me die there where they tried to kill me. Yet I know this. No disease, nothing will ever destroy me. I was saved for some strange and dreadful end. Let my destiny go where it will. As for the children, do not concern yourself about the boys, Creon. They are men and will always find a way to live wherever they may be. But the girls, my two helpless girls, take care of them for me.
Now go inside the house.
I must obey, but on one condition.
Yes, I am listening.
You must send me into exile, away from Thebes.
What you ask is a gift that only Apollo can grant. Don't try to be master in everything. What you once won and held did not stay with you all your life.
Again, the wording is kind of dense, but the play still has a deep, rich meaning and a deep, rich history. Most scholars agree that this is probably the best Greek play that is out there. Ironically, the year that Sophocles wrote it, it finished second in this competition, whereas Sophocles is noted for having won more first place prizes than any other Greek playwright, but we'll talk about that more when we talk about Sophocles. Cool. All right, so we're going to move on from Oedipus. Again, if you have any questions about Oedipus itself, please feel free to email me. I'll answer them. I'll try and get back to you, and we can, if we have a discussion that develops, we'll pass it along to the rest of the class so they can join us. Going back to the Greek history, again, you have the 12 Greek gods that live on Mount Olympus, the 13th being Hades below. Dionysus is the Greek god of spring, fertility, of wine, of dance, of song, and so around the 21st of March, again, they didn't necessarily have that date and that month, but around the vernal equinox, the first day of spring, you would have a celebration that would begin. Usually it was a phallic ceremony. In other words, they would celebrate the male phallus. Usually that meant that they would dance nude. One of the things about the word tragedy literally means goat song. And so there's a great deal of discussion about why it's called a goat song. Some people have suggested that the winner of the contest was given a goat as the prize, and that may be true. Another comes from the idea that instead of just having a celebration to Dionysus, they would also sacrifice a goat during that ceremony and have the goat as a part of the meal for that celebration. I don't know. There's nothing that tells me. Now, different cultures have different ways of celebrating to the gods. The Mayans, for instance, when they would defeat an enemy, they would slaughter their captured slaves, captured soldiers, and pull out their hearts and dedicate them to the gods. The Incans, when they would win a war, the general was the one who was sacrificed, whoever the leader of the army was, because again, you want to go to the afterlife, you want to go to heaven, and so whenever the Incans would win a war, the person that was sacrificed was the general of the army, which was nice for the king because you didn't have any competitors for the crown usually. But different, I would say that was human sacrifice. My guess is the majority of us are Christians. I know this may come as a bit of a shock, but Christians believe in human sacrifice. Now, it's one person, but Jesus was still the Son, living human being, Son of God, and he sacrificed himself on the cross. Again, I'm a Baptist, so some people have different ways of interpreting that, but for my belief system, according to the Baptist, Christ died on the cross to wash away my sins, so that when I stood at the pearly gates, I am fresh and new. Yes, as long as I accept Jesus as my Savior and ask for forgiveness of my sins. Now, Catholics have a lot more that you have to go through. Episcopalians, a lot more you got to go through. But Christianity believes in a form of human sacrifice. Many religions, Judaism, believe in animal sacrifice. One of the things about the Greeks is that there may have been some animal sacrifices. But the other thing about the Greeks is that they were, especially the Athenians, were very good at sailing ships. Living on the Mediterranean, one of the things that made the culture, what made them such a powerful nation, is that they were able to build these ships, these triremes, what they're called. They were very powerful, very fast, they were slender, their prow had a long point on the front of it that was underneath the water, which again made it able to cut through the water faster, but you could also ram other countries' ships and sink them with the prow that stuck out. So they needed a lot of ropes in order to tie their sails and all that sort of stuff. And there's a plant in the world that makes incredibly good rope. Because it has little burrs on it and you can just twist it together. You don't have to knot it, you just twist together. And because these little burrs that are on the stalks of the plant, it twists and you can add additional stalks to it and you can make them a very fine rope, and over time as the plant dies it actually gets stronger because it wraps a little harder. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it's called hemp. For those of you who still don't know what I'm talking about, we'll just call it marijuana. And so you strip all the leaves from this plant, you make rope all day long, and you're stuck with this pile of leaves on the side. And one of the things that happens is you want a little incense to burn at your celebration to Dionysus. And so you take all these nice leaves and you put them on an altar and you light them on fire, which may give you another different attitude about how these ceremonies went about. And you have to imagine in 534 BC is the first evidence we have of this happening, so most scholars agree. In 534 BC, there was this man who stood out in front, he was a priest to the god Dionysus, and he stood out in front of this crowd with this nice aroma going on. And he said something to the effect of, "Hey dudes, look at this." And he became the world's first actor. His name was Thespis. It's where we get the root word for thespian today. I'm going to give you a little video that tells you a little bit about Greek history, the history of Greek theater, and we'll talk more about it on the other side. Enjoy.
If we believe the ritualism theory from last episode, then eons of religious or quasi-religious rituals eventually birthed drama. But how? Well, it has to do a bunch with our grape-loving friend over here. By the 6th century BCE, Dionysus had become a very popular god in Greece, especially among the ladies. According to some maybe true, maybe not reports, women participated in a ritual where they'd run through the countryside, tear apart some animals, and then come home. It's fun, right? And if you want to know more about it, you can check out The Bacchae by Euripides. It is great. Whether or not that happened, we do have good evidence that in the 6th century BCE, some less wild rituals celebrating Dionysus spread through Greece. One of the most popular involved a procession from Eleutheria to Athens, where worshippers lofted a giant phallus and sang songs called dithyrambs in praise of you-know-who. And one theory about those dithyrambs actually is that eventually they evolved into theater, when singers started acting out the action instead of just singing it. Aristotle and his followers think that sooner or later a singer stepped out of the dithyramb chorus and started acting out individual characters. This actor was called Thespis. Like, actually, that was his name, and that's where we get the noun thespian. According to stories, Thespis learned to switch between characters, and to enhance the effect, he got the bright idea to use masks. This was Greek tragedy in its earliest form, one actor paired with a chorus. It still sounded a lot like a dithyramb, or like a bard reciting portions of epics as banquet entertainment, but the direct impersonation of a song's characters made it different. And it continued to develop, adding actors and architectural elements for about 150 years. Tragedy, by the way, derives from the Greek words for goat and song, which may have had to do with animal sacrifices that were made during the festivals, or it may just be another reference to satyrs. Theater eventually gets institutionalized in Athens. Late in the 6th century BCE, pre-democracy Athens was ruled by a tyrant named Pisistratus. Pisistratus came to power through violence, but once he was in charge, he wanted to unite and strengthen the city. He decided that festivals, particularly those in praise of Dionysus, would be a good way to get everyone on board. Because wine? So, in the 530s BCE, he expanded one of the god's pre-existing spring festivals and turned Athens into City Dionysia, with a theater competition at its center. Now, this festival wasn't only about theater, it was also about reaffirming Athens as a source of pride and power. It lasted 5 or 6 days and included a lot of events. Military and political leaders poured out libations. Tribute from cities of the Athenian Empire was displayed on stage. Names of men who greatly benefited Athens were read out. Children of soldiers who had died in war and had now reached maturity were brought on stage. There were also dithyramb contests. The theater competition took place in an outdoor amphitheater in front of a crowd of about 14,000 spectators. That likely included the whole range of Athenian society, even women and slaves. But, of course, only male citizens could perform in the chorus or vote for best play. The contest was between 3 different playwrights. Each had to submit a tetralogy, a 4-part work. The first 3 parts were linked tragedies, and the 4th part was a satyr play, which was lewd and usually involved a lot of prop penises. In 486 BCE, a comedy competition was added. Once competing playwrights were chosen, they were matched with a prominent Athenian citizen who would bankroll the production. Our big spender was called the Choragus, and it was his job to assemble the chorus, hire the flute player, and buy the masks or any other set furniture like a bed or a throne. The playwright usually did the jobs that we now associate with director, composer, and set designer. Sometimes they even acted in their own work alongside other performers. There may have been up to 3 actors on stage, and then the chorus. Unfortunately, none of the music from these shows remains, but there are some painted vases that suggest what productions may have looked like. Fun fact, the chorus would sometimes dance. I wonder how hard it is to high kick in a toga. For a look at the theater structure itself, let's go to the thought bubble. The Theater of Dionysus was an outdoor amphitheater built into the Athenian hillside. You can still visit the ruins today. Its first incarnation might not have had seats, but eventually they were added, wood first and then stone. The seated section was known as the theatron, or seeing place. The chorus performed on a flat part called the orchestra, and in the center of the orchestra was the thymale, or altar. At some point, a dressing hut called a skene was also built, so that actors could change masks. With only 2 or 3 actors playing every role, you gotta change masks pretty often. There were several ways on and off stage, known as paradoi, including 2 side entrances so big choruses could march on and off when needed. There was also a place on top of the skene where an actor playing a god could appear and descend in a cart, which was called the God in the Machine, or the Deus Ex Machina. Maybe you're wondering, why might a playwright need a god to descend from the heavens? Well, sometimes you write your way into a situation and you can't write yourself out. So it's pretty helpful to have Zeus or Apollo come on down and make everything right. All of the actors wore masks made of linen with hair attached, so they probably looked pretty frightening, especially the one of Oedipus with blood all around the eyes. Tragic actors also wore robes and platform shoes called cothurni, so just imagine a lot of big, sweeping gestures and trying not to trip. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Ugh, that thing is no less terrifying from the inside either. So, during the dithyramb contest, after each playwright presented his tetralogy, a group of 10 randomly chosen citizens would select the winner, who was honored with an ivy wreath, sacrificial animals, and a big banquet. The Athenians took this contest very seriously, and if any funny business was suspected, there were lawsuits. Tragedy hit its golden age in 5th century Athens, first with the works of Aeschylus, then Sophocles and Euripides. Because papyrus disintegrates and invading hordes kept burning libraries, we don't have the plays that they wrote. Aeschylus wrote as many as 90 plays, but we have only 7. Sophocles wrote 120, but we have only 7. Of the 92 Euripides wrote, more than 7 at least this time. We have 19. Those 30-odd plays have had a huge impact, though. They're still very widely read. They matter to us now because they provide a template for most contemporary drama. But let's look for a second at how they mattered then. It's a huge deal to have 14,000 of your most prominent citizens hang out on a hillside watching plays when they could be doing their civic duty. But as it turns out, they were doing their civic duty. The leading citizens of Athens decided that it was important to get together and see plays that actively question the values and structures of the state. These plays are exploring what it means to be a part of a family and a nation, and what to do when divided loyalties creates conflict. They can teach you to be a better person and a better citizen by encouraging you to ask, through the dramatic action, what a good person is and what a good citizen does. Tragedy does something else, too, at least according to Aristotle. He wrote the Poetics, one of the world's first works of literary criticism. And he had a theory about what made tragedy so important. And his theory was about catharsis, which literally means purgation. Aristotle writes that tragedy, through pity and fear, effects the proper purgation of these emotions. Now, a lot of scholars have spilled a lot of ink trying to explain what this means, so it's unlikely we are going to get to the bottom of it right here and now. But let me quickly offer one interpretation of catharsis. Let's try out the idea that tragedy, by exciting the emotions of pity and fear, becomes an outlet for those emotions. If we believe that pity and fear maybe aren't that helpful in a democracy, then we can argue that it's better to feel these things at a play. Have an emotional catharsis and then just get that stuff out of our systems and go back to being productive members of society. Like, imagine how productive all those people who've seen Les Mis hundreds of times must be. Or people who've seen thousands of episodes of General Hospital, for that matter. Next.
Again, all the plays that we have from this time period are from 525 to 406, so about 120 years of history. We have 32 plays. We have 32 tragedies. We also have 11 comedies. We'll talk about the comedies next class period. But one of the things about the stage itself is that over time, again, initially, I'm just going to say it was a flat area on the side of a hill. One of the things about a hillside is that there's the natural amphitheater effect of it. In other words, if you stand at the bottom of a hill and speak, the hill itself sort of amplifies the sound. And so if you have a little flat area, again, this could cause some confusion, so I'm going to say it very slowly. The round circular area where the Greek chorus danced is called the orchestra. Now, I know that you have been taught your whole life that an orchestra is a group of musicians, and it becomes a group of musicians in the times of the Romans, and especially by the Middle Ages. But on this test, for now, you have to understand that the word orchestra means dancing place in Greek theater. It is the round circular, again, I'm not even saying it was circular to begin with, but over time, it became this 65-foot wide or diameter circular space where the chorus would dance. And again, the chorus is made up of all the Dionysian priests. The chorus ranged in size from around 10 people to around 50 people. Eventually, the rule is going to be set at 15. Because different city-states, again, when you have a large number of chorus members, the choir just sounds better. When you have fewer people, the choir just doesn't sound as great. And so eventually, the number is set at 15 people in the chorus, and they would dance around. I don't know if you've seen the Olympic competition where they have the ribbon dancing and throwing the balls up in the air. That's the sort of thing that, again, I think the chorus looked like. There was choreography. They were wearing robes that would signify male, female, that sort of stuff. Colors, one of the things about the Greeks, my guess is when you think of Greek people, or think of Greek as a society, you see people wearing white robes. They certainly wore, the robes were called chitons as opposed to togas. Togas is Roman. But they would wear these chitons, and it was probably of any color other than white. White is just a really difficult color to achieve unless you have bleach. And bleach wasn't readily available nor known at this period of time. And so they would typically take their cloth and they would, if you've ever seen pure muslin, pure cotton fabric, the color is a little tan, it's a little off-white, sort of, I don't have any, well, I've got a little tan on, I guess, today. But it takes dye readily, so you can take it and make it purple or blue or pink or red or any of these other colors. And so colors, because eventually you're going to have audiences of 15,000 people, 20,000 people watching these plays, generally when you would have someone walk out in purple, for instance, that would be royalty. That would be a king or queen. When you had somebody walk out in green, for instance, that was the person who had money. When you had somebody walk out in yellow, that was usually the coward, yes? And so colors became the symbol for those people. So even if you couldn't hear every single word of dialogue, you knew from the way that they were dressed, where they fit into the pecking order, who they were in society, why people were asking them for money or why they were running away from people, that sort of thing. And so color became a form, a language, a symbol for the people that were wearing those colors in the plays. Again, the chorus would often be colorful, have ribbons, have all these things moving and dancing around. They eventually would raise an area behind the orchestra called the skene. The skiene is where you would have the actor's performance at raised level, probably about 2 or 3 feet higher than the orchestra. Again, with Aeschylus, we'll talk about this specifically next time we talk about the act with the individual authors. Aeschylus adds the second actor. Oedipus is when he starts out in 534, comes out and is a solo, a monologue. Aeschylus adds the second actor, one of the things that he brings along, which adds dialogue. And then Sophocles is going to add the third actor. There are never more than 3 actors in the Greek stage. Now, there are more than 3 characters, but they would just change characters by changing their mask, as you saw in the video. So there are never more than 3 actors on the stage, around 15 people dancing in the chorus, and then eventually they added a level of gods where they would have the gods stay, and you would have them descend in the Deus Ex Machina to talk amongst the people and that sort of thing. Again, all those sort of things developed over time. The machinery developed over time. Again, you have these periactoi, which are 3-sided prisms, which are going to allow people to have scenery painting of some sort on them. And then you're going to also have these rolling platforms called ekeklima, which are going to come out and expose dead bodies or whatever it is that you need to expose. Again, there's a little very nice diagram of how the periactoi work, where you've got them prisms that turn around in tandem to create different scenes on them. Again, where these existed on the stage is questionable, because they could have been on top of the skiene, they could have been on top of the Deus Ex Machina, but again, these things are big sails basically, and so the wind, these are all outdoors, so the wind would have some effect on them. So we know they existed, but because they're all made out of wood, it's just your bet as good as mine as to where exactly they existed in the theatrical space. Then the theatron itself, the theatron means viewing place, is where you would have the audience sit. And again, over time, I'm going to say initially, people would just sit on the hill itself. And then as the plays continued over time, they would carve out rock seats, and eventually the city itself actually came in and made a civic improvement and cut out the seats so that people could sit more comfortably in the bleachers to watch the play. Again, over time, initially I'm going to say you had maybe 100 or so people watching. Over time it got up to be the thousands, up to 20, some people say 30,000 people got to watch these things. Cool. I'm going to give you 5 uses of the chorus while we're here. These are ways that the authors are going to use the chorus. The first is the way they use them in Oedipus Rex to participate in the action. The chorus actually comes out and says, "Oedipus, we're starving, please help us." That is a participation in the action. They actually have dialogue that they just speak back and forth. Second of all, they play the ethical role. In other words, the chorus is telling the actor the way they should act. It's sort of like having a good angel on one shoulder and a bad angel on the other, where you're contemplating the right choice. The chorus is usually always on the right side of things. They play the ideal spectator. And what I mean by that is, if there's I'm not saying there's anything funny in Oedipus Rex, but if there is something funny, the chorus laughs at it. If there's something sad or emotional, they're the ones that cry at it. It's like the mood music for a movie. It sort of gives you the sense of whether it's serious, whether it's scary, what you should be going through. The fourth thing is it adds visual appeal, actually oral appeal. Again, there's songs being sung and danced. And lastly, a structural function. For instance, they're the ones that tell us of Jocasta's death, which has happened off stage. And then you may have the doors open and the ekeklima rolls out and exposes the dead body, but you don't actually physically see her hang herself. The Greeks didn't believe in looking at people die, because, again, this is just an interesting way of looking at life if you don't know about germs. The Greeks believed that if you saw death occur, then death entered your body. And so again, if you think about it in those terms, if you're taking care of a sick person, the germs from the person get in you and infect you. Well, the Greeks believed that that happened because you watched death take that person, then death entered you. And so they would take care of people, but they wouldn't ever look at a person who was dying. As a matter of fact, even the Greek helmet had a little slits in it, so when you hit somebody with your sword, when you look to the left or to the right, you couldn't see the person actually dying because you had such a limited view. You could literally only see straight ahead in the Greek armies. Cool. A little history, and then we're done for today. before we get into the Hellenic period in Greek history. Again, the Hellenic period is from around 475 to around 325. So about 150 years where the Greek society reigns over much of the Mediterranean. But it begins at this period in time when Persia is trying to invade in Greece, and there are 3 times that the Greeks repel the Persian invasion. First of all, we talked about the Trojan War last time. So around 1200 BC, the Greeks have settlements in the Ionian Peninsula in Turkey. And so the very first incursion is there's an uprising around 490, 495, depending upon what your history teacher tells you. There's a rebellion amongst the people who live in the Ionian Peninsula that is quelled by Darius. And then Darius, or some people say Darius, but Darius the first sails across the Aegean Sea and lands at Marathon. And at around 480, I think is the date that's on your text there, 490, Darius I is defeated at Marathon. The leader of the military, the general at the military, for that defeat was a man named Aeschylus, who at the beginning of the next class period, we're going to talk about him as a playwright. But one of the things he is most noted for is winning the battle at Marathon. Now, this was a naval incursion, and again, I told you the Athenians had a very good fleet of Navy ships, and so that wasn't as surprising as some people claim, because the Athenians were very good naval people. But again, it's repelling a Persian incursion. You're welcome. Darius's son is a man named Xerxes, and I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 300, but that is very accurate historically. Xerxes, not necessarily in the particulars, but in the sense that Xerxes did lead an army around the edge of the Aegean Sea, coming down through a pass where they were met by 300 Spartans who delayed them for about a week or two, which allowed the rest of the Greek armies to come together and eventually led to the defeat of Xerxes in around 480 BC. Again, he actually made it through and burned Rome down at one point. But after that, the Spartans were able to mount the armies of Greece to repel the incursion of the Persian army once again. And so Greece becomes the dominant state in the Mediterranean based upon their ability to repel the Persians from taking over their country and moving on westward to Rome and all those sort of things. So you have the beginning of the Hellenic period, beginning around 475, 480, with the ultimate defeat of Xerxes and his armies at Thermopylae. Cool. The next class period, we're going to talk about the Greek playwrights and Greek philosophers, which will develop out of this Hellenic period. I hope this hasn't been too much draining on your soul, and we'll see you next time.